Hi, you're welcome back. And this is clip 17E on wind energy. And I want to make a special request to viewers. Please watch this. Please take in this, because this is something which I have committed unbelievable amount of resources and money and effort to. And I just want to make a request of everybody. And funny enough, it may not be what it seems. Now, 15 years ago, at least, if not 20, I considered the idea of replacing some or all of our fossil fuel imports into Ireland with renewable energy, and in particular with weather-based energy systems. And because the wind is obvious for Ireland, and because there was so much hype about wind and so much money to be made from wind, it became the predominant policy of government and the predominant source. And at that time, having studied it in great detail, I made a series of videos in 2011, which I've taken down here. I might put them back again, but I've taken them down because in the interim I've even learned more information, which even convinces me even more that I'm correct. Essentially, wind energy, industrial wind energy into the mains electricity system does not work. It doesn't do anything. No fuel has ever been saved. And this is all down to an accounting misconception, an accounting trick, or the inability to count. Now, whatever one's opinion is, the figures normally don't lie. Now, I'm not asking you, the viewer, to agree with me on this, strangely enough. Because having assessed why efforts by the European Platform Against Wind Farms, which I am the Irish spokesman, to become the predominant force in Ireland, were beaten. And they were beaten because people in local areas rejected what we stood for. They didn't want what I was preaching to become the policy of government, and they thought it was too radical. In addition, they thought that some of my views on things like immigration, climate change and all that stuff was too radical. It was too conservative. But what I have done in this video, and in the one that will follow, 17F and G perhaps, is to separate out that and to give you a way of thinking that will allow you to think for yourself. And while I don't insist you end with a conclusion similar to mine, I go as near to insisting that you consider this in the way I'm asking you to consider it. That's not too much to ask. I have got requests from at least 8 different communities in the last 2 years, and I've travelled to some of them. And I currently have 2 on my books that want me to visit them and give a talk at their presentation or their meeting, where they're threatened with wind farms. And I think where I did give a little help, it was helpful. They built on that. But it got you to the stage where you don't have to investigate it for yourself. I mean, what is education? Education is finding out what is already known, not to experiment yourself to find out what's already known. So you learn the English language because that's what's available out there in the community. And that's what you're going to have to use. You don't invent your own language and say everyone else has to change to that. You drive on a certain side of the road because that's the convention. It's ridiculous to try and change it. And so with this. So what I'm doing is I'm taking away all my views on religion, history, migration, left-right politics, all of that. And I'm going down to a more basic point about wind. And that is, does it work? Can it work? Has it any role to play? And what is that role? And so I'll be going out of doors for some of that. And if you see the word 17, please check it in, particularly if it's 17E, F, G and so on. I have earlier ones there which are not on this theme precisely. So the first thing you have to ask is, what is wind energy designed to achieve? What's its function? Is it to make us feel better? Is it to please the European Union? Is it to help naive voters or attract them towards particular political parties? To my notion, the only justification for it is twofold. One, that it will bring down the cost of the product, which is mostly electricity, or anything produced by electricity. And two, that it will save the burning of fossil fuel. Now you might say, why don't I get into nuclear? Nuclear is a hugely expensive technology. It is relatively clean. I'm not going there at the minute. It's banned in Ireland in any event. So you might say, let's go for nuclear. I say, first of all, you go nowhere. You do not change something if it's not broken. And our system, before we started interfering with it, and when we left it to the ESB and engineers to manage, worked 100%. The only thing was wrong with our system was that there were strikes all the time. They held a monopoly, and I believe some of the moving away from the ESB way of doing things was to break that monopoly. They had a stranglehold on the people. They could hold them to ransom. And so they may have thought that they could do that. But in actual fact, if the conventional power generators went on strike in the morning, all's down. Nothing in the wind energy programme allows us to replace fossil fuel. You cannot use it on its own. There has to be at least 40% of the grid system fossil fuel. Firm heat generated from either water hydro, fossil fuel, or nuclear, which is a form of thermal energy. It's heat energy. It still uses a boiler. So we're going to look at what the goal is. I think if you consider those are the only two goals: to bring down the cost of electricity and the products produced by it, and to reduce dependence on fossil fuel. And I'm going to look at the second one in a while. But the first one is bring down the cost of electricity. That was a deliberate, diabolical lie. The correct cost of electricity in Ireland at the moment is about 14.5 cents per unit, per kilowatt hour. The cost now is 25 to 26 cents per kilowatt hour. And yet the cost of fuel has not risen. In fact, it came down after the recession in 2008. The cost of wind energy per megawatt hour wholesale is 75 to 80 euros, or 7.5 to 80 cents per unit. The cost of ordinary electricity, commercial fossil fuel electricity, is 57 or 5.7 per megawatt per kilowatt hour. 57 per megawatt hour, or 5.7. So compare 57 to 75, and you see that wind energy is not cheaper. And Eamon Ryan of the Green Party said this. I heard it myself, that it was cheaper. There is no justification to that. That is a complete and utter lie. Because it's cheaper to produce it using fossil fuel than the wind, which is supposedly free. And that is because, partly, your fossil fuel generation is in one big building, away from people, where the noise doesn't matter. It's in Money Point or wherever. And there are just a few of them. Wind energy is spread all over. Lots of separate companies, all trying to feed out of the one trough, all limited in what they can supply into the grid to 60%, and all dependent on huge subsidies and a guaranteed price and a rule that it must be taken. Now bear in mind that wind energy must be taken into the grid if it can be accommodated up to the 60% limit. But waste to heat, which is 50% renewable and reliable and there when you want it, it's the burning of waste, is also 50% renewable, as I said. It's shoved off. They're not allowed dispatch. it's treated and discriminated against differently. It's treated differently than wind energy, which is probably a breach of EU competition law. So we have a system of renewables, waste to heat, which works, which will allow fossil fuel to be turned off. And we're keeping wind energy, and indeed its sister, solar energy. And in the next video, I'm going to ask you to consider my claim. Just consider it. But do remember that the electricity grid and everything on it is a machine. It's not a political thing. It's not a political party. It's a machine. And that machine either works or it doesn't work. And I'm going to look at why it doesn't work. But I know, as I advise people on how to beat planning, and I saw this happening in Kells and County Meath, a person came up to me and said, "You're wrong. Wind is a great idea. I just don't want it here." And I know there are people elsewhere who believe that the Irish Green Party is the way to beat wind energy. And I know of English people living here who say that the Labour Party in Britain is a great party. But we know that the love of wind energy is directly corresponding with the love of socialism. And we know that the Green Party, while in government with Fianna Fáil, started this renewable energy hysteria and craze. And the idea that people still think and still believe that the authors of this are the ones to solve it, to my mind, is mad. And so in the next video, we're 12 minutes in the next video, we're going to try and get you to understand what a machine is. And the thing about a machine is there is no limit on its size on the big scale. And there is virtually no limit on the small scale. There may be a limit on how small it can go, but you're talking about tiny. So here's a mobile phone, a machine. Here's a hair clip. It's a tool, and the divide between a tool and a machine is very narrow. There's not much difference. And so you can have an aircraft, which is a machine. You can have an oil tanker, which is a machine. It's huge. And so the electricity grid in Ireland and elsewhere is a machine. It has nothing to do with the mindset of people. Don't confuse it with a train over in the west of Ireland, which is heavily subsidised and which costs the taxpayer €85 for every person to get on a train with subsidies. But it's part of a wider network, a lot of which does work. I mean, the Dublin to Belfast, the Dublin to Cork, these railway lines and the Dart in Dublin all work. They all are profitable up to a certain extent. So you can have a line on it, a small line, subsidised, without making the whole network futile. Like aircraft as well, you can have government interference, as there was in early stages of air transport in Ireland, and it doesn't mean that planes don't fly. It means they do fly. Likewise, you have government policy on cars and all that, and excise duty on the fuel. They still work. The question is, does wind work? And if you now accept that there are only two reasons why you should have wind energy. One is to bring down the cost of electricity. That's debunked. If you can't know the difference between €57 and €75, then you really are not at the races. A person that got educated and doesn't understand that 57 from 75 means that 57 is less. 57 to 10 is 67. And 10 is 77. And take 2 from that and you have 18. So if you add 18 to 57, you get 75. You have to understand that simple concept. And it's amazing how many people cannot understand that 57 and 18 is 75. I find it incredible. I'll have to explain that. I'll put a plus mark here. And that's why I ask you to stay. Because at this stage, most of you will turn off and say, that fella's talking through his hat. That's the fact. Wind energy does not bring down the cost of electricity. It puts it up. And that leaves us with only one other thing to consider. Whether wind energy reduces dependence on fossil fuel or it doesn't. And for that, we'll see you back for the next video soon. Thank you.